Welcome to the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield. We offer you independent voices and underreported stories about topics you won't hear anywhere else. Join us as we delve into the deeper issues behind the news stories of the day on the MTC Report.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
I saw right in front of me a group of police officers pull a protester forward and begin beating him over the head with sticks. There's video of it that you can see. I mean, this was a all-out war that was waged on indigenous protectors that were doing nothing more than peacefully assembling. There was no fires. There was nothing like that until the police began their violent attack on us.
Hi, this is Mark Taylor-Canfield for the MTC Report. I'm a nationally recognized journalist and musician living in Seattle. I'm a guest journalist every week on the Jeff Santos Show. I'm also a contributing editor for Democracy Watch News. And today, on this episode of the MTC Report, I'm talking about some of the news stories that have been breaking in the last 24 hours. We're getting close to the national elections in the United States, and I'm covering the following stories. Number one, the authorities cracking down on Native protesters at Standing Rock in North Dakota.
A protest.
There's no fear here. We know that we have the moral high ground and that we're doing what's right.
Tonight, no comment from the oil company. The spokesman for the protesters says they will continue efforts to block that project.
2. The proposed mega merger of AT&T and Time Warner.
We begin today's show with the proposed merger of telecommunications giant AT&T and Time Warner. AT&T has agreed to purchase Time Warner for $85 billion. If approved by federal antitrust regulators, the merger would give AT&T control over Warner Brothers film and television studios, along with CNN, TNT, HBO, and many other brands. Critics warn of further limits to competition and higher prices for customers. The merger could also allow AT&T to give preferential treatment to streaming video from Time Warner's companies, which would violate the principles of net neutrality. On the campaign trail, both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump addressed the merger.
Look, I think it raises questions and concerns, and they should be looked into. I hear the Congress will start having bipartisan hearings, which I think is appropriate. So I'm going to follow it closely, and obviously, if I'm fortunate enough to be president, I will expect the government to conduct a very thorough analysis before making a decision.
They're trying desperately to suppress my vote and the voice of the American people. As an example of the power structure I'm fighting, AT&T is buying Time Warner and thus CNN, a deal we will not approve in my administration because it's too much concentration of power in the hands of too few.
Meanwhile, AT&T is bracing for what is expected to be a lengthy and tough antitrust review of the proposed merger. The deal would need approval of the U.S. Justice Department and possibly the FCC approvals. Wall Street analysts are trying to determine the likelihood of that approval.
Number 3, breaking story today regarding the FBI Director Comey's notification to Congress that new emails have been found that may be, quote, pertinent to the investigation into Hillary Clinton's private email server.
Welcome back. Tom Harmon here with you. Okay, here's what we know. Adam Goldman reporting over at the New York Times about James Comey and the FBI. It's very straightforward. Comey says that he's taking steps to, quote, that the emails have surfaced in an unrelated case, so we don't know what that is, that, quote, appear to be pertinent to the investigation, end quote. We're not sure what investigation that is. And he said that the FBI is taking steps, quote, to determine whether they contain classified information as well as to assess their importance to our investigation, end of quote. We don't know what that means. He said he doesn't know how long it's going to take. He said he doesn't know if the new information is significant. So what does all this mean? It could mean absolutely nothing. But it's being dropped a week and a half before the election. Brilliant. By James Comey, a registered Republican, and the head of the FBI.
We got to mention reporter Greg Palast and his new film based on his book called The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. And how can you not love a guy who always wears a suit and tie and a fedora?
Tom Hartman here with you, and very pleased to have in the studio with me Greg Palast, the world-famous investigative reporter, BBC, Rolling Stone, everything. You've reported for pretty much every, really high-quality, cutting-edge news site on Earth, Greg.
Yeah, that's been my problem. As you can tell, I'm not Henry Higgins, and I've been exiled mainly to Britain for BBC and The Guardian.
It's remarkable because I remember in 2000 when Jeb Bush ordered 40,000 African Americans knocked off the voting rolls so that his brother could get within 500 votes of stealing the election. You reported that for BBC. Everybody in Europe knew what was going on. Everybody all around the world knew what was going on. There's a complete blackout on it here in the United States.
Yeah,
it was incredible.
Well, I found that Jeb Bush and Catherine Harris had removed tens of thousands of black men from the voter rolls. Like page one, literally in The Guardian, top of the nightly news in Britain, and because BBC, it's all over the world except where it bounced off the electronic Berlin Wall to stop the.
It's weird.
It was how Bush won the presidency by swiping it.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
So I want to thank Amy Goodman and Juan Gonzalez, my colleagues over there at Democracy Watch News, for some of the following footage about Standing Rock. Native activists against the Dakota Access Pipeline actually entered the headquarters for the campaign of Hillary Clinton, the Democratic Party's nominee for U.S. president. They tried to deliver a letter calling upon Clinton to publicly oppose the pipeline, but she punted.
Thursday's mass arrests came as Native American youth flooded the Hillary Clinton campaign headquarters in Brooklyn, New York, to demand Clinton oppose the pipeline. After Clinton campaign staffers declined to meet with the delegation, they attempted to present a letter to security guards.
We humbly ask you to take this letter from us. Please take the letter. Take the letter. Take the letter.
Protesters were later ordered by police to leave or face arrest. While Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has come out against the pipeline, Hillary Clinton has so far refused to take a stance. In the Clinton campaign's first statement on the pipeline, spokesperson Tyrone Gale wrote in response to the young protesters, quote, "Now all of the parties involved need to find a path forward that serves the broadest public interest. As that happens, it's important that on the ground in North Dakota, everyone respects demonstrators' rights to protest peacefully and workers' rights to do their job safely," end quote. Climate activist and 350.org founder Bill McKibben responded on Twitter, writing, "Hillary Clinton managed to make a statement about the Dakota pipeline that literally says nothing."
In my humble opinion, religious and cultural disrespect and intolerance towards tribal traditions has been, and for their dissent against this Keystone Pipeline, has been the main theme of the authoritarian crackdown on the demonstrations. This has led to international exposure for this story. It's a struggle between the tribes, the police, and corporate security over the future of the land. And there's been a paramilitary type of response on the part of the authorities, which has led to numerous injuries and many, many arrests. And the protests continue. Even after the police raided the opposition's encampment and roughed up the demonstrators. Tribal authorities have asked the U.S. Department of Justice to intervene and hold state officials accountable for the treatment of tribal members and their supporters. Also, Democracy Now!'s Amy Goodman, one of the most courageous journalists in the United States, was arrested and is facing charges of trespass. She was arrested while covering the events at Standing Rock. And so much for freedom of the press. And some might say freedom of assembly and freedom of speech at that point.
I mean, the police were pushing forward and just grabbing people at will. We had a number of lockdowns that were right in front of us in this truck in the middle of the road that was used to attempt to blockade these police from advancing forward. There were 5 people actually that were locked to that. They attempted to construct a teepee in the middle, right behind people that were praying and singing. And there were folks that locked down to that teepee or attempted to. The police ripped that teepee down and ripped those people out. It was a really horrible scene yesterday.
Well, just minutes before the police raid on the camp in North Dakota, here in New York City, Native American youth flooded the campaign headquarters of Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton to demand that she oppose the Dakota Access Pipeline. Clinton's opponent in the Democratic primary, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, has come out against the pipeline, but Clinton has so far refused to take a stance.
Well, in an email to Democracy Now!, Clinton campaign spokesperson Tyrone Gale wrote, quote, Secretary Clinton has been clear that she thinks all voices should be heard and all views considered in federal infrastructure projects. Now all the parties involved, including the federal government, the pipeline company and contractors, the state of North Dakota and the tribes, need to find a path forward that serves the broadest public interests. As that happens, it's important that on the ground in North Dakota, everyone respects demonstrators' rights to protest peacefully and workers' rights to do their jobs safely, unquote. Well, for more, we're joined by Daniel Grassrope of the Lower Brule Sioux Nation in South Dakota. He was part of the Native American youth who flooded into Clinton's campaign headquarters. You built a teepee there in Brooklyn in the campaign headquarters, Daniel?
Yes, we did. We wanted to demonstrate a cultural event in Hillary's campaign office, and we wanted to bring our songs and prayer to tell her to oppose this pipeline, that the youth, the future leaders of this nation and the future occupiers of this nation do not want this pipeline because it will affect our water.
A group of you flew in from Standing Rock?
Yes, there was 11 of us that flew in from Standing Rock.
And no one from the campaign was willing to sit down and talk with you at all?
No one from the campaign wanted to talk to us. We called out for leaders, campaign management, and the security officers didn't want to take the lining to oppose this pipeline, and also the secretary at the front desk didn't want to take the letter as well.
And the importance of this struggle to you and other young Native Americans across the country?
The struggle, well, we're trying to protect our water, and right now it's been threatened by this pipeline. And everyone in the Native Nation knows that water is our first medicine. Water brings life to everything. The plants, the trees, the four-legged, the animals that we eat, everything brings life to us in general. And it's just, it's very important that we have water.
I wanted to turn to a quote we read in the headlines of Bill McKibben. Bill McKibben, the founder of 350.org, after he read the statement that the Clinton campaign put out. And it is the first time that Hillary Clinton, at least her campaign, has put out a statement on the Dakota Access Pipeline. Bill McKibben said Hillary Clinton managed to make a statement about the Dakota Pipeline that literally says nothing, literally. Daniel, what about their response that they did put out a statement? And do you think it's satisfactory?
The response that I get, she's telling people that in the ground of the North Dakota that everyone respects the demonstrated rights to peacefully protest, and as protectors of land, we are peaceful. We are there peacefully. We're not there to violate or engage in any violent activity. We are there to stop the pipeline through prayer, and that's what we've been doing from the beginning.
Another breaking story involves yet another multinational mega media coup, where AT&T plans to buy Time Warner, another mega entertainment and media company. This is just another attempt to control the U.S. entertainment and media market, which has been a long-standing issue in the United States, where now, because of these mergers and because of the especially the Republicans on the Federal Communications Commission, headed at one point by Michael Powell, Colin Powell's brother. The FCC has been very supportive of corporate media mergers when it comes to the press and communications. So you can blame the FCC on a lot of this, and I did a story, an investigative journalist story for Free Speech Radio News on the Pacifica Network about studies that the FCC itself had commissioned, which when I presented it to them at a public hearing, they denied any knowledge of. And I interviewed a couple of the professors involved, including Professors Janich and Napoli, who both talked about what they considered to be a violation of administrative law. And I actually got a call from the FCC Director's Office asking for information about their own studies. So I can tell you a little bit about the suppression of research that's gone on. These are big money interests, and they want to buy up all the media. They want to control everything that you and I see on a daily basis. I should also mention at this point that the United States is currently ranked 41st in the world in terms of press freedom by Reporters Without Borders, an international advocacy group for journalism. So this is something that we all need to face, and that all journalists and editors and publishers and bloggers need to speak out about at all times in every way possible.
This is Barclays Capital Managing Director Ami Razwadowski.
Well, it's difficult to put specific odds right now. I think that, we're digesting the fact that this was just announced very recently. But I think that on paper, there is precedent, and precedent generally is a good framework in terms of providing additional support for regulatory approval. The challenge, of course, is that we're in a different political environment and a different regulatory environment. And so with this deal being announced on the eve of an election, and what type of people will be put into place post that election really will factor into some of the decisions being made about the approval of this transaction.
AT&T has clashed with the FCC in recent years on a number of fronts. The company was among those that sued the FCC in 2015 to block the Obama administration's landmark rules on net neutrality, which bar internet service providers from obstructing or slowing down consumer access to web content. Meanwhile, new details have emerged about how AT&T has been spying on Americans for profit. The Daily Beast reports AT&T is keeping private call records and selling the information to authorities investigating everything from the war on drugs to Medicaid fraud. The secret plan is called Project Hemisphere. AT&T reportedly has been retaining every call, text message, Skype chat, or other communication that's passed through its infrastructure. Some of the records date back to 1987. Sheriff and police departments each pay upwards of $1 million a year for access to the call records. No warrants are needed, and AT&T requires governmental agencies to keep secret the source of the information. Well, for more, we're going to go to Craig Aaron, President and CEO of Free Press, which has come out against the multi-billion-dollar merger of AT&T and Time Warner. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Craig. Talk first about the significance of this mega merger.
Well, mega merger is right, Amy. I mean, I think the first thing for people to keep in mind is just how big this deal is. in addition to the $85 billion that is going to the shareholders at Time Warner, AT&T is taking on another $22 billion in debt. So this is over $100 billion, and we need to ask ourselves, for what? What is the benefit? If you're not a Time Warner shareholder, if you're not a senior executive, if you're not a Wall Street banker, there is very little in this deal for you except higher prices and a new gatekeeper over what you watch, see, hear, and read every day. And so that's why we've come out strongly against this merger. We don't think it's in the public interest, and we think it has huge problems putting this much media power under one corporate umbrella.
So those are some of the stories that I've been working on today. By the way, Greg Palast is a U.S.-born journalist now working with the BBC, and his new film, The Best Democracy That Money Can Buy, is currently touring the country, calling attention to many allegations about voting purges, voter suppression around the country, mostly by Republicans. The details of Palast's shocking expose should cause everybody to wonder about the potential manipulation of the vote during this next election. I mean, if self-serving gerrymandering by the politicians doesn't make you question the election system, Greg Palast's film will. And, once again, how can you not like a guy who dresses like a film noir reporter, complete with suit, necktie, and fedora whenever he reports?
Probably should have opened. The Bundy brothers, Eamon and his brother, were acquitted in Oregon. This is big news. They're still facing some charges having to do with their dad's efforts down in Nevada, and so they weren't released from custody, but they were acquitted, which apparently, if you're armed and white and you take over federal property, that's considered First Amendment.
That's a protest.
Yeah, that's a protest.
Can you imagine
whereas if
Black Lives Matter
right,
taking over a government property, taking over a police station?
Well, it doesn't even have to be Black Lives Matter. Here is a clip from a call that we got yesterday, live from Standing Rock.
Oh, yeah.
Here, listen to this one.
The police are coming right now. I see the riot police north. They're marching towards us with shields, with batons, with helmets. They are pushing people back from the north on Highway 1806. They're surrounding us. Literally, I see them in front of me, and to the left of me, and to the right of me. And so that's what's happening. It's really chaotic, and this is right now.
Yeah, and that was right now. That was then. That was yesterday. And arrests, pepper spray. One person was tased right in the face, got a hook, a barb in right next to his eye. Somebody else got dragged out of a medic a Native American medic was dragged out of his car, and the car was still running. Somebody else had to jump in the car and stop it from hitting a bunch of people. I mean, this was serious stuff. Apparently, and this is land that was given to these folks by treaty in the 1860s, and they never gave it up.
Well, in fact, that's one of the things that I have been investigating is well, not only pipelines, but you can't take away people's rights and people's land and crap all over their land with hydrocarbons.
Apparently you can't.
Unless you take away their vote. And I'll have you know that the highest, dig this, if you are a black person, the chance that there'll be some technical reason why your vote doesn't count is 900% higher than if you're white. But if you're an American native, it's 2,000% higher than if you're white. There's no group that suffers more vote suppression, election theft, election rigging as victims than Native Americans. I saw this at the Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico and all over the place because both parties are hitting them because it's a matter, it's not Republican or Democrat, though about 95% of American natives vote Democrat. It's mainly them versus the 1% that wants their land. It's never changed. It's never changed, except instead of, cowboys with 6-shooters driving them off the land, it's elections officials who scrub their votes.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
one more news story that I've been covering today is the disqualification of a medicinal marijuana initiative in Arkansas, which still appears to be on the ballot, but state officials say that they won't count the votes. So here's a segment from KPSM News in Fort Smith, Arkansas.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. The Arkansas Supreme Court tosses the Medical Cannabis Act from the ballot, but Issue 7 backers say they're appealing. They're also encouraging voters to keep casting their ballots for Issue 7 and to also vote yes on Issue 6, now the other medical marijuana measure. Now, the group released the following statements. We've been up against many hurdles, including the governor, attorney general, surgeon general, a competing loss campaign, and 2 lawsuits, and we keep fighting to ensure that no patient faces arrest for using a safe and effective medicine, whether that protection comes from Issue 6 or Issue 7. Early voting is, of course, already underway and has been since Monday. Thousands of ballots have already been cast, and that's left a lot of you wondering what happens now. Well, 5 News reporter Catherine Gilker found out. All right, Catherine, what are election coordinators telling you?
Well, I'll explain that in just a minute, but first, I quickly want to fill you in on why Issue 7 was disqualified in the first place. A petitioner argued signatures collected by paid canvassers who didn't meet state guidelines should be voided, and the state Supreme Court agreed. So that meant Arkansans for Compassionate Care didn't meet the number of signatures they needed to put the measure on the ballot. So even though the issue has been disqualified, you'll still see it on the ballot when you go vote. Ballots are prepared 60 days before the election because by law, absentee ballots must be sent out 45 days in advance. And once those are printed, they cannot change anything on any ballot. Chairman of the Benton County Election Commission, Russ Anzalone, says for voters, that means you can still vote for Issue 7.
You can vote for it. The only thing is we will not tabulate it. We will not share the results. We already have state law dealing with that, and we have documentation that we cannot share that information with anyone.
And as you just heard in their statement, Arkansans for Compassionate Care are still encouraging people to vote for Issue 7.
And they're telling a lot of people to vote yes on Issue 6, which just yesterday was a competing measure. Now, basically saying 6 is better than no medical marijuana measure at all. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Well, there are several differences between Issue 6 and Issue 7. Now, if approved, there are 17 conditions that would qualify for the use of medical marijuana under Issue 6. Under Issue 7, 56 conditions would have qualified. Now, Issue 6 does not allow patients to grow their own plants. 7 would have. Also, dispensaries can be banned in local communities, but Issue 7 did not call for that provision.
In Oregon, a federal jury on Thursday acquitted anti-government militia leaders Eamon and Ryan Bundy and 5 of their followers of conspiracy and weapons charges related to their armed takeover of a federal wildlife refuge earlier this year. The stunning verdict shocked federal prosecutors, who called the 41-day occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge a lawless scheme to seize federal property by force. The occupation forced federal employees onto administrative leave, cost the federal government over $4 million, and alarmed local residents. It also angered the Paiute tribe, which has treaty rights to the land the militia occupied. The tribe says militia members mishandled tribal artifacts and bulldozed sacred sites. Militia leaders Eamon and Ryan Bundy still face federal charges related to an armed standoff in Nevada in 2014.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
By the way, Tom Hartman gave a commentary today about the state of the press in the United States, which I thought was interesting. So here's Tom's commentary on Free Speech TV.
Be ignorant and free in a state of civilization. It expects what never was and never will be. Whenever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. That, whenever things get so far wrong as to attract their notice, they may be relied upon to set them right. Talk Media News Service, based here in Washington, D.C., is owned and run by my dear friend Ellen Ratner. Ellen is an experienced and accomplished journalist, and a large number of interns and young journalism school graduates get their feet wet in reporting by working with and for her. In March of 2010, I was in Washington for a meeting with a group of senators, and I needed a studio from which to do my radio and TV show. Ellen was gracious enough to offer me hers. I arrived as 3 of her interns were producing a panel discussion type of TV show for web distribution at talkmedianews.com, in which they were discussing their viewing audience, their recent experiences on Capitol Hill. One intern panelist related that a White House correspondent for one of the big 3 networks had told her that the network registered a huge amount of interest in a hot story that week of a congressman's sexual indiscretions. Far less popular were stories about the debates on health care, the conflicts in the Middle East, and even the Americans who had recently died in Iraq or Afghanistan. Quote, so that's the story they have to run with on the news, end quote, the intern said, relating the substance of the network correspondent's thoughts, because that's what the American people want to see. If the network doesn't give people what they want to see, viewers will tune away. The network won't get any ratings or revenues or viewers. The other 2 interns commiserated with the first about what a shame it was that Americans wanted the titillating stories instead of the substantive ones, but they accepted without question that the network was therefore obligated to give people what they want. When they finished their panel discussion, I asked these college students if they knew that there was a time in America when radio and television stations and networks broadcast the actual news instead of infotainment because the law required them to. None of them had any idea what I was talking about. They were mystified. Why would a station or network broadcast programs that were not popular or not what people wanted? But the reality is that from the 1920s, when radio really started to go big in the United States, until Reagan rolled it back in 1987, federal communications law required a certain amount of public service programming from radio and television stations as a condition of retaining their broadcast licenses. The agreement was basic and simple. In exchange for the media owners being granted an exclusive license from the Federal Communications Commission to use the airwaves owned by the public, they had to serve the public interest first. And only then could they go about the business of making money with the rest of their programming throughout the day. If they didn't do so, if they didn't serve the public interest, when it came time to renew their license, public groups and individuals could show up at a public hearing on the license renewal and argue for the license being denied. One small way the stations lived up to their public service mandate was by airing public service announcements, PSAs, for local nonprofit groups and community events and charitable causes. But they also had to abide by something called the Fairness Doctrine, which required them to air diverse points of view on controversial issues. Separately, during election campaigns, broadcasters had to abide by the equal time rule, which required them to provide equal airtime to rival candidates during an election. But the biggest way they proved that they were providing a public service and meeting the requirements of the Fairness Doctrine was by broadcasting the news, real news, actual news, local, national, and international news produced by professional old-school journalists. Because the news didn't draw huge ratings like entertainment shows, although tens of millions of Americans did watch it every night on TV and listen to it at the top of the hour on radio from coast to coast. And because real news is expensive to produce, with bureaus and correspondents all over the world, news was a money loser for the big 3 TV networks and for most local and radio and TV stations. But it was such a sacred thing. That is, after all, the keystone that held together the station's license to broadcast and thus to do business. It didn't matter if the news lost money. It made all the other money-making things possible. Through much of the early 1970s, I worked in the newsroom of a radio station in Lansing, Michigan. It had been started and was then run by 3 local guys, an engineer, a salesman, and a radio broadcaster. They split up the responsibilities like you would expect, and all were around the building most days and would hang out from time to time with the on-air crew, all except the sales guy. I was forbidden from talking with him because I worked in news. There could be no hint, ever, anywhere, that our radio station had violated the FCC's programming in the public interest mandate by, for example, by going easy on an advertiser in a news story or promoting another advertiser in a different story. News had to be news, separate from profit and revenue, and if it wasn't, I'd be fired on the spot. News, in other words, was not part of the free market. It was part of our nation's intellectual commons, and thus the price of the station's license. After Reagan blew up the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, 2 very interesting things happened. The first was the rise of right-wing hate speech talk radio, starting with Rush Limbaugh that very year. The second, which really stepped up fast after President Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which further deregulated the broadcast industry, was that the money-losing news divisions of the big three TV networks were taken out of the wings of their entertainment divisions and wrung dry. Foreign bureaus were closed, reporters were fired, stories that promoted the wonders of advertisers or other countries like big movie production houses owned by the same mega corporations that own the networks began to appear, and investigative journalism that cast a bright light on corporate malfeasance vanished. So the chapter is an informed and educated electorate. It's about our media in rebooting the American dream.
And Tara, where was this incident for instance, in relationship to the September 3rd dog attacks at the tribal burial site?
When Dakota Access jumped ahead over 20 miles to destroy the site that had just been identified by the tribe the day before as a sacred place, that happened on September 3rd. That's also the anniversary of the Whitestone Hill Massacre. That was the exact place today that Dakota Access was busily constructing its pipeline, right in the background, as literally hundreds and hundreds of people came to stand and pray and bring all of their energy forward to stop this from happening. And it was right at that site where Native American men, women, and children had been attacked by private security, by dogs and maced, and all the same things that we saw yesterday. This incredible escalated violence against people that were doing nothing more than trying to stop the destruction of sacred sites right in front of their eyes.
Tara, you saw rifles aimed directly at people, police aiming those rifles?
Yes, there were police walking around everywhere with assault rifles. Directly across from us, there was actually a policeman holding his rifle trained on us, directly on us. Beanbag rifle, beanbag non-lethal weapons were also aimed at us.
The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
There were police officers filming this, laughing as human beings were being attacked, being maced. I mean, it was a nightmarish scene, and it should be a shame to the federal government. It should be a shame to the American people that this is happening within U.S. borders, to indigenous people and to our allies, to all people that are trying to protect water. Yesterday was a really shameful moment for this country and where we stand.
And the number of people you estimate were arrested, Tara?
I saw dozens of people being arrested. I mean, they were just pulling people out and arresting them.
That was done in Florida in 2000, right. So in the months before the election. And it's amazing how, you know, if something, it's like in China, the news about Tiananmen Square, you know, I mean, they've managed to scrub that from the memory banks, and we've scrubbed this from your own reporting for the BBC from our memory banks.
Yes, and then I even, you know, there's also one that really got buried, but again was on top of the nightly news in 2004. A trick called caging that they used. They would send black soldiers letters saying, "Hi, hello from the Republican Party." Now they didn't, they don't expect these black soldiers to vote for them. They do expect the letters to come back as undeliverable because they're in Iraq. They say, "Do not forward." And to their voting address, you can, if you're in Iraq under a Humvee, if you're in Fallujah,
your email's
you're still an American citizen who can vote, even if you're, if you're trying to avoid IEDs. So they knocked off all these voters. Anyway, that's how Kerry, in the end, that was one of the big pieces about why Kerry lost the presidency, because of that killed Ohio, with other things I uncovered. And Kerry himself, by the way, what's this whole thing where no one complains about the American elections, that they're unfair? Kerry said I was right. And
Al, George W. Bush sued Al Gore. At the Supreme Court. I mean,
to preempt him from demanding a real count of the vote.
That's right.
So and Gore knew about the black voters too before the count was over, being wiped out. But so what I have to do is I have to sneak. Here's my thing. So to get stuff into the U.S. news, I have to sneak it in. One, I can go on Tom Hartman, and I'm not laughing because thank God, God bless the stations listening to this. But I do things like I've made a Saturday morning cartoon about the theft of the election in Florida, with Jeb and Catherine Harris as cartoon characters, and so I put it in my film. I have a film.
Now here's a place you always meet a lot of friends.
I guess we'll just have to watch the drama play out. But anybody who takes this election for granted, after an hour and a half spent here with Greg Palast, detailing in excruciating detail the 10 major ways that Republicans are rigging and stealing elections and votes. And I would say, okay, here comes a number 11, right? The old October surprise trick. And, gee, we don't know if this is important. We don't know if it's even relevant. We're not even sure it's related. But we're going to hold a news conference about it. Right. That stinks. I don't know how to say it beyond that. It stinks. I mean, maybe Comey's getting all kinds of pressure from his Republican buddies. I don't have any idea. And that's the problem. None of us have any idea. There's not a there that's, clearly defined anyway. And, where do we go with this?
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's demanding an investigation into a strike on a school in Idlib, Syria that killed 26 civilians, mostly children. Ban's spokesperson said the attack could amount to a war crime.
The Secretary General calls for immediate and impartial investigation of this and other similar attacks against civilians in Syria. If such horrific acts persist despite global outrage, it is largely because their authors, whether in corridors of power or insurgent redoubts, do not fear justice. They must be proved wrong.
Russia's defense ministry denied its warplanes were responsible for the attack. It released drone footage that it claimed showed the school was not struck from the air and accused the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and the Civil Defense Network, White Helmets, of spreading propaganda. In Washington, a White House spokesperson said either Syrian or Russian warplanes were to blame. Iraq faces what could become the largest humanitarian crisis in its history, with hundreds of thousands set to be displaced during a U.S.-backed offensive aimed at retaking the city of Mosul from ISIS. The latest data from the UN show more than 10,000 civilians have fled their homes since the launch of the offensive, with another 200,000 expected to flee in the next few weeks. The UN says it plans to build 6 camps capable of accommodating an estimated 80,000 civilians and can't rule out as many as 1 million displaced civilians as the fight continues. In Calais, France, aid workers say dozens of children were left without shelter for a second consecutive night after authorities lured them from the ruins of the refugee camp known as the Jungle with false promises of help. French authorities told the unaccompanied minors to line up for buses that would carry them to new refugee centers where they could apply for asylum or reunification with families in Britain. But the teenagers were literally left out in the cold when the buses failed to materialize and riot police prevented them from re-entering the camp. This is Dorothy Sang of the charity Save the Children.
What is really concerning is it's getting dark, it's really cold, and these children have had enough. Like, they've been waiting months to be put in protective shelter, and now once again we've sat them there. We were asked to encourage them to get on these buses that never materialized.
On the campaign trail back in the United States, Donald Trump repeated a campaign pledge to end all immigration by Syrian refugees and others from what he called terror-prone nations. Trump was speaking Thursday in Springfield, Ohio.
We're not going to take the risk when it comes to the safety of the American people, no longer. So let me state this as clearly as I can. If I'm elected president, I am going to keep radical Islamic terrorists the hell out of our country.
Meanwhile, another woman has come forward to accuse Donald Trump of sexual assault. Nini Laaksonen, a former Miss Finland in the Miss Universe beauty pageant that Trump once owned, says Trump grabbed her buttocks during a photo shoot in 2006. Laaksonen is the 12th woman to accuse Trump of unwanted sexual contact since the release of the 2005 Access Hollywood tape in which Trump boasts of sexually assaulting women. Russian President Vladimir Putin has weighed in on claims he's meddling in the U.S. election. Putin made the remarks Thursday in southern Russia.
Does anyone seriously think that Russia can in some way influence the choice of the American people? Is America some kind of banana republic? America is a great country. Correct me if I am wrong.
Hillary Clinton has accused rival Donald Trump of being a puppet of Putin. She also says Russia's behind the theft of campaign emails made public through WikiLeaks. President Obama Thursday granted clemency to 98 federal prisoners, bringing the total number of prisoners whose sentences he's commuted to nearly 900. That's more than the previous 11 presidents combined. Many of the prisoners received harsh sentences under mandatory minimum drug laws that critics say targeted communities of color. Obama's also rejected a number of commutations, a result of a surge in applications since a clemency initiative announced in 2014. In the Venezuelan capital of Caracas, clashes broke out Thursday as the country's increasingly militant opposition stepped up efforts to oust President Nicolás Maduro. Opposition leaders have called for a national strike today and a march to the presidential palace, unless the election board allows for a stalled referendum on whether to recall President Maduro. Each side's accused the other of attempting a coup. Venezuela's political unrest comes as the country is grappling with a massive economic crisis, which has led to shortages of food, medicine, and other necessary goods. We'll have more on the crisis in Venezuela later in the broadcast. The United Nations Thursday voted overwhelmingly to start talks aimed at abolishing all nuclear weapons. The landmark resolution will see the UN convene a conference next year to negotiate a legally binding instrument for worldwide nuclear prohibition. The vote was 123 to 38, with 16 countries abstaining. Voting against were all 9 known nuclear states: China, Russia, France, Britain, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, as well as the United States. Broadband internet providers will need to ask for permission if they want to sell customers' private data to third parties. Well, that's under new rules adopted Thursday by the Federal Communications Commission. Watchdog groups are hailing the move as a major step forward on internet privacy. The media reform group Free Press said, quote, "The companies that carry all of our speech online have no business profiting from all the information they gather without our consent," unquote. The rules do not require internet providers to get clear permission before using private customer data themselves. The world's whaling watchdog agency moved Thursday to restrict Japan's annual whale hunt, rejecting claims by Japanese whalers that they kill marine mammals for scientific research. Advocate Nicholas Entrup of the group Ocean Care applauded the move by the International Whaling Commission, but said the organization lacked the teeth needed to enforce its decision.
Our concern, of course, remains because so far, even with the ruling of the International Court of Justice, Japan has not stuck to that ruling and has ignored it. It continued scientific whaling under a new name, but very little has changed.
And a United Nations agency has concluded a deal to create the world's largest marine reserve. Today's agreement sets aside an area in Antarctica's Ross Sea that's nearly as big as the state of Alaska. This is U.S. State Department official Evan Bloom.
We've had a real achievement today. We've created the world's largest marine protected area, and that's a major step forward for marine conservation globally. So it's a wonderful moment.
The marine sanctuary is home to whales, seals, penguins, and other animals. The agreement on the Ross Sea Sanctuary came as the World Wildlife Fund released a shocking new study that finds more than 2/3 of the world's wildlife could be gone by 2020. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.
A protest simmering for weeks boils over. In North Dakota, armed guards and police in riot gear and military Humvees clashed with protesters.
At least 16 protesters were arrested. The protesters are trying to stop a controversial oil pipeline from being built, the Dakota Access Oil Pipeline. It runs adjacent to the Standing Rock Reservation, where Native Americans say it's destroying sacred sites.
There's no fear here. We know that we have the moral high ground and that we're doing what's right.
Tonight, no comment from the oil company. A spokesman for the protesters says they will continue efforts to block that project.
What's going to happen when we keep saying we're going to win, we have all the states, he's doing great, and all of a sudden, you know, he's insulted people for 2 years with no repercussion whatsoever.
Well, I think the solution, Guillermo,
is we're going to open these emails and everything is going to be honky-dory.
Yeah, I think the solution, Guillermo, is and I'm sorry to cut you off, we're out of time here, is an educated and informed populace. You know, Jefferson said, if we want to have a functioning republic without an educated and informed populace, we are hoping for something that never existed and never will. I'm paraphrasing, but it's close to that. Guillermo, thank you for the call. And you know, I'm doing my bit for that. And hopefully all of you are. Hopefully you are too, because every single one of us can be reporters and you know, purveyors of the truth. So that's your assignment over the weekend. Wake up a few people, okay? Democracy actually isn't a spectator sport. It does require you. Tag, you're it. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
Another election, another convention, another media intervention, another reason, another season to vote for Bernie.
It's not one thing. This is a pattern of divisiveness, of a very dark and in many ways dangerous vision of our country, where he incites violence.
I have talked to doctors who have told me that people walk in the door extremely sick. And doctors say, why didn't you come in here 6 months ago when you first felt your symptoms? And people said, I had no health insurance, or I had a high
This is the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield.
We can have a world-class healthcare system without waiting lines